The forbidden contact, the asteroid mining station, hung lifeless in the void, its twisted metal hull scarred by plasma burns and punctured by debris. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically through shattered viewports, casting eerie shadows across the abandoned corridors. The Terran-Zephyrian War had reached even this remote outpost, leaving nothing but death and silence in its wake. Jackson Reeves pressed himself against the cold bulkhead, his breathing shallow as he listened for any sign of movement. 3 months had passed since the evacuation order, but he'd been trapped in the lower levels during the attack. The emergency rations were nearly gone. His makeshift shelter in the OR processing chamber was failing as the station's systems slowly died around him. His hand trembled as he adjusted the portable scanner, searching for any remaining power sources. The device suddenly chirped, detecting movement in the upper sectors. Jackson's blood ran cold. After weeks of absolute solitude, something was alive on the station. The footsteps were too heavy to be human, too rhythmic to be random debris, settling. They echoed through the ventilation system with deliberate precision, the sound of a predator searching for prey. Jackson had heard the stories from other survivors before the communication arrays went dark. The Zephyrians were relentless hunters. Their enhanced senses capable of tracking humans across vast distances. He sealed the chamber door and retreated deeper into the processing facility, where the heavy machinery might mask his scent and body heat. But as he moved through the narrow maintenance corridors, a strange sound reached his ears. Not the mechanical noise he expected, but something organic and disturbing. The Zephyrian warrior was breathing heavily, her respiration irregular and agitated. Through a crack in the wall panel, Jackson caught his first glimpse of his pursuer. She was tall and lean, her blue-gray skin marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and pulse in the dim light. Her armor was unlike anything in the military, briefings organic-looking, almost alive, with veins of luminescent fluid running through its surface. But it was her behavior that confused him. Instead of methodically searching the facility, she seemed distressed, almost frantic. Her movements were jerky and uncertain, as if fighting some internal battle. Kira Nethys had been tracking human survivors for 6 cycles, her success rate flawless until now. The scent trail had led her to this forgotten station, but something was wrong. The familiar markers of human presence were there: sweat, fear, desperation, but underneath lay something impossible. Her sensory organs, far more complex than simple human olfactory systems, detected chemical signatures that shouldn't exist. The air carried traces of Zephyrian nesting grounds, specifically the sacred mineral deposits found only in her home system. It was as if this human had spent extended time in the most holy places of her people. She paused at the entrance to the processing chamber, her throat sacs inflating involuntarily as the scent grew stronger. This was beyond contamination. The human had somehow absorbed the chemical essence of Zephyrian sacred sites. The very thought made her stomach convulse with revulsion and confusion. Her training demanded immediate execution of any human survivors. But her body was responding in ways that violated every military protocol. The specialized glands beneath her scales were releasing bonding pheromones, chemicals meant only for family recognition. Her skin was becoming more permeable, automatically preparing for scent exchange with a nestmate. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her body was recognizing this human as kin. Jackson watched the alien warrior stumble, her weapon clattering to the floor, as she pressed both hands against the wall for support. Whatever was happening to her seemed to cause genuine distress. He'd expected cold efficiency from his executioner, not this display of apparent illness. Against every survival instinct, he found himself concerned for her well-being. The briefings had painted the Zephyrians as monsters, but this creature seemed to be suffering. "Are you hurt?" he called out, immediately regretting the impulse as her head snapped toward his hiding place. Kira's eyes, large and silver in the emergency lighting, locked onto the maintenance panel where his voice had originated. Her markings flared bright blue, then faded to deep purple as she struggled to process what was happening. "Human," she said, her voice carrying harmonics impossible for human vocal cords to produce. "Why do you carry the scent of the sacred nests?" Jackson emerged slowly from his hiding place, hands visible and empty. Up close, the alien was even more imposing. But her obvious distress made her seem less threatening than the story suggested. "I don't know what you mean," he answered honestly. "I've been hiding in the mineral storage chambers below. There are crystals there, some kind of ore deposits the mining crews never processed." The explanation seemed to physically wound her. She doubled over, making sounds that might have been their equivalent of retching. When she straightened, her eyes held a mixture of horror and something that looked remarkably like grief. "You have been sleeping in our ancestral nesting grounds," she whispered. "The very stones that witnessed the birth of my sister, the crystals that hold the memory of our family line for generations. Your human essence has mingled with the most sacred places of my people." Jackson began to understand the magnitude of his unknowing transgression. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I didn't know. I was just trying to survive." But Kira was no longer listening to his words. Her training warred with biological responses beyond her control, and the humans continued. Presence was making it impossible to think clearly. Every breath brought more of his contaminated scent, more evidence of the sacrilege he'd committed simply by existing. In the wrong place at the wrong time, her weapon lay forgotten on the floor. Between them, as two beings from different worlds faced the impossible complexity of their situation. The sacred violation, the silence stretched between them like a physical barrier. Kira's breathing had become shallow, her chest rising and falling in rapid succession as she fought against her body's treacherous responses. The human male stood, motionless, seemingly aware that any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile peace existed in this moment. "Show me," she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Show me where you've been sleeping." Jackson hesitated, recognizing the danger in leading his potential executioner to his only sanctuary. But something in her tone suggested this wasn't about tactics or strategy. This was personal, deeply so. He led her through the winding corridors to the lower levels where the mining operation had carved deep into the asteroid's core. The chamber he'd claimed as shelter was vast, its walls lined with veins of crystalline formations that caught and refracted the light from his emergency. Beaconed into countless prismatic fragments, Kira stopped at the threshold, her entire body trembling. The scent here was overwhelming, a concentrated essence of everything sacred to her people. But worse than the presence of human contamination was the evidence of prolonged habitation. His makeshift bed lay directly beneath a formation of soul crystals, the singing stones that recorded the spiritual essence of her ancestors. "Ina used to collect these," she said, approaching one of the smaller crystal clusters with reverence. Her voice carried a weight of memory that transcended species barriers. "My younger sister. She believed they held the voices of our grandmothers." Jackson watched as she traced the crystal's surface with one long finger, careful not to make direct contact. "They do sing," he offered quietly.
"Oh."
"Sometimes at night, I could hear harmonics, like voices carried on the wind." The admission made her markings flare with painful intensity. "You heard the ancestor songs," she breathed. "No outsider as ever. It should be impossible." She moved deeper into the chamber, cataloging each violation with growing anguish. Human belongings scattered among sacred formations. His scent markers embedded in the mineral matrix that would hold them for generations. Even if she killed him now, his essence would remain part of this holy place forever. "My mother brought me here for my first nest blessing," Kira continued, her words seeming to pour out against her will. "I was barely past my initial molting, scared of the dark passages. She held my hand and told me that the stones would remember me always, that I would never truly be alone as long as the ancestor crystals sang my name." Jackson felt the weight of unintentional sacrilege settling on his shoulders. "Where is she now?" he asked gently. "Dead," Kira replied flatly. "Killed in the human bombardment of our homeworld 3 cycles ago. Along with Yenna and most of our clan." Her silver eyes fixed on him with renewed hostility. "Your people called it a surgical strike against military installations. They failed to mention that our military and civilian populations share the same nesting grounds." The accusation hung between them, carrying the weight of a war neither had chosen, but both were trapped within. Jackson had heard the official reports. The sanitized casualty figures that reduced entire civilizations to statistical footnotes never considered what those numbers represented in personal terms. "I'm not a soldier," he said finally. "I was a xenogeologist, part of a survey team looking for rare minerals. We didn't even know your people existed until the first attacks." "Ignorance is its own form of cruelty," Kira responded, but her voice lacked the venom he expected. "Your people strip mine sacred sites without pause, poison water sources that have flowed pure for millennia, all in the name of progress and profit." She moved to where his sleeping area had been arranged, kneeling beside the impression his body had left in the soft mineral sand. Her sensitive olfactory organs were overwhelmed by the concentrated scent signature, layers of human essence that had accumulated over months of desperate survival. "You dream here?" she observed, the statement carrying implications he didn't fully understand. "Yes," he admitted. "Sometimes. Mostly nightmares about the attack, about the people I couldn't save. Dreams leave scent traces among my people," Kira explained. "Your sleeping mind has been sharing space with our ancestral memory matrix. The stones have been learning your thoughts, your fears, your hopes." Her voice cracked slightly. "You have become part of our sacred record, whether either of us wishes it or not." The full horror of the situation was becoming clear to both of them. This wasn't simply a matter of physical contamination or cultural misunderstanding. On some fundamental level, human and Zephyrian essence had become intertwined in a way that violated the most basic principles of her people's belief system. Jackson knelt across from her, separated by the shallow depression that had been his bed for months. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," Kira said, her markings pulsing with patterns of deep distress, "that according to my people's laws, you have become nest-bonded to my family line. The stones recognize you as kin, even though such recognition is abomination. Die." Weapon remained forgotten in the upper corridor, but the distance between them felt more dangerous than any blade. Two beings caught in the collision of incompatible worlds, neither able to escape the consequences of choices they'd never intended to make. The singing crystals continued their ancient harmonies around them, now forever changed by the impossible union of human dreams and Zephyrian memory. The impossible Bondars passed in the sacred chamber as the weight of their situation settled around them like a shroud. The emergency beacon's light grew dimmer, its power cells finally succumbing to months of continuous use. Darkness. Only the soft bioluminescence of Kira's markings and the faint glow of the ancestor crystals provided illumination. Jackson had watched the alien warrior cycle through what seemed like every emotion her species possessed. Rage, horror, grief, and something that looked disturbingly like acceptance had all played across her features in the span of their vigil. Now she sat motionless, her eyes closed, apparently communing with the crystals in ways he couldn't begin to understand. "My stomach's been empty for 2 days," he said finally, breaking the meditative silence. "I found some emergency rations in the upper levels, but they're long gone now." Kira opened her eyes, studying him with an expression he couldn't read. "Human nutritional requirements are different from ours," she observed. "What we consume would likely poison your system." "At this point, I'm willing to risk it," Jackson replied with grim humor. "Starvation is a pretty definitive outcome." She remained quiet for several minutes, her internal struggle visible in the shifting patterns of light beneath her skin. Finally, she reached into a compartment of her organic armor and withdrew a sealed container. The substance inside glowed, with the same soft luminescence as her markings. "Nethera," she said, setting the container between them. "Sacred sustenance reserved for deep space journeys and religious ceremonies." For me to share this with an outsider, she trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Jackson looked at the offering, understanding its significance even without fully grasping the cultural implications. "Why?" he asked. "'Cause you were dying," she answered simply. "And despite everything, my training tells me I find I cannot watch it happen." He opened the container carefully, releasing a scent that reminded him of ozone and summer rain. The substance inside had the consistency of honey, but moved with its own subtle current, as if alive. "Will it hurt me?" "It's unknown," Kira admitted. "No human has ever consumed Nethera. but your system has already adapted to the chemical environment of this chamber. Perhaps it will accept our sustenance as well. The first taste was electric, sending waves of sensation through his nervous system that had nothing to do with flavor. Energy flooded his starved body, but more than that, he felt a strange sense of connection, as if the substance was teaching his cells how to better utilize the mineral-rich environment around them. Kira
Atched.
His reaction with fascination and growing alarm. Your scent is changing, she observed. The Nethera is integrating with your biological signature. Jackson felt the change as well, a subtle shift in his perception of the chamber around them. The crystal formations seemed more vivid, their harmonic resonance clearer and more meaningful. He was beginning to understand the songs they sang, not with his mind but with some deeper awareness he'd never known he possessed. He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Transformation, Kira whispered. The sacred sustenance is designed to help our young adapt to new nesting environments. It changes the consumer to better harmonize with their surroundings. Her markings flickered with distress. You are becoming something between human and Zephyrion, not fully either, but carrying elements of both. The implications were staggering. Jackson could feel his senses expanding, becoming more acute and complex. The simple act of breathing now brought layers of information about their environment, about Kira herself, that he'd never perceived before. I can smell your emotions, he said with wonder and horror. Fear, confusion, and something else. Something like ... belonging. Kira's response was to curl in on herself, her markings dimming to almost nothing. The nest bond is strengthening, she explained in a voice barely above a whisper. Your transformation is triggering my own biological responses. I am beginning to recognize you as family, despite knowing it's impossible. They sat in the growing darkness, two beings caught in an impossible situation neither had chosen. The sacred sustenance continued its work in Jackson's system, each heartbeat bringing new changes, new connections to the alien environment that had sheltered him. Tell me about Yenna, he said softly, instinctively knowing that sharing memories might help them both process what was happening. For a moment he thought she wouldn't respond. Then, in halting words that grew stronger as she continued, Kira began to speak of her sister, the young Zephyrion's fascination with the singing stones. Her collection of crystals from every world their family had ever visited, her dreams of becoming a memory keeper like their grandmother in return. Jackson spoke of his own family, lost in the chaos of the war's early days. His daughter Emma, who'd wanted to be a musician, and his wife Sarah, who'd believed that understanding between species was always possible, given enough patience and goodwill as they shared their grief and memories. The crystals around them seemed to resonate more strongly, as if recording not just their words, but the emotional truth beneath them. The chamber was becoming a repository of interspecies understanding, a place where two enemies had found common ground in their shared losses. Neither noticed when Kira's hand moved to rest beside Jackson's on the mineral sand, or when his breathing synchronized with hers. The impossible bond was growing stronger with each passing moment. Defying every law and custom their respective peoples held sacred. The hunt begins. The tranquil atmosphere of the crystal chamber shattered as proximity. Alarms began wailing throughout the station. Red emergency lights strobed through the corridors, casting violent shadows that danced across the walls like harbingers of death. Kira was on her feet instantly, her training overriding the contemplative mood that had settled between them. Zephyrion wore a ship, she said, her voice tight with sudden tension. Close-range scanners and a full hunter squad. Jackson struggled to stand, still adjusting to the changes the sacred sustenance had wrought in his system. His enhanced senses now picked up vibrations through the station's hull, the rhythmic pulse of docking clamps, engaging with mechanical precision. Friends of yours? Commander Vex Korath, Kira replied, her markings flickering with patterns Jackson was beginning to recognize as fear. My unit leader and the most efficient human hunter in the fleet. If he's here personally, it means my absence has been noted. She moved to the chamber's entrance, peering through the shadows toward the upper levels. Her enhanced hearing caught the sound of multiple footsteps, heavy and coordinated, moving through the station with military precision. Each step brought them closer to discovery. "He'll follow my scent trail," she continued, more to herself than to Jackson, "but the readings he gets won't match his expectations. My biological signature has been altered by prolonged exposure too." She gestured helplessly at him. Jackson felt the weight of realization settling over them both. "I've contaminated you too." "The sacred sustenance creates a feedback loop," Kira explained quickly. "When you consumed it in this environment, surrounded by my scent markers, it began adapting your biology to complement mine. But the process works both ways. My system has been unconsciously adjusting to accommodate your presence." The sound of movement grew closer, accompanied by the mechanical whine of scanner equipment being activated. Commander Vex was methodically searching each level, and their sanctuary, in the lower mining complex, would only remain hidden for so long. "Can you explain the situation to him?" Jackson asked desperately. "Make him understand what's happened." Kira's laugh was bitter and sharp. Vex Korath earned his reputation by personally eliminating over 300 human survivors. He views mercy as a character flaw and adaptation as weakness. "The moment he detects human scent markers on me, he'll execute us both for contamination." She began moving through the chamber, gathering anything that might serve as a weapon or tool. Her military equipment lay abandoned in the upper corridor. But the mining operation had left behind various implements that could serve in desperate circumstances. "There's another way out," Jackson said, pointing toward a narrow maintenance shaft. That led to the station's outer hull. The mining crews used it to access the exterior collection arrays. "If we can reach the service pods, ... The escape route would take us through the primary docking bay," Kira interrupted, "directly past Korath's ship and his hunter squad." She paused in her preparations, studying Jackson with an expression he couldn't interpret, unless ... Unless what? "Your sense signature has changed enough that their scanners might not immediately identify you as human," she said slowly, working through the implications. "If we can mask your thermal signature and alter your movement patterns, you might pass." For a hybrid worker or genetic experiment, the plan was desperate and thin, built on assumptions about biology neither of them fully understood. But as the sound of the hunting party grew closer, desperation seemed like their only viable option. Kira retrieved a container from her abandoned equipment, returning with what looked like a organic paste that writhed with its own internal movement. "Biocamouflage compound," she explained. "Designed to help scouts blend with alien environments. It will suppress your human heat signature and partially mask your scent." Jackson didn't hesitate. The paste felt alive against his skin, cool and slightly electric, as if millions of tiny organisms were adjusting to his biology. Within moments, his reflection in the crystal formations looked subtly different. His features softened, and his skin tone shifted toward Kira's blue-gray coloration. "Now we move," she said, taking the lead as they headed for the maintenance shaft. "Stay close, breathe slowly, and whatever happens, do not speak. Your voice will give us away instantly." Crawled through the narrow passage, the sounds of the hunt echoing through the station's superstructure around them. Commander Vex's voice could be heard giving orders, his tone carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to unquestioning obedience. As they reached the outer hull, Jackson caught his first glimpse of their pursuers through a damaged viewport. The Zephyrian hunter squad moved with lethal efficiency, their armor more advanced than Kira's, their weapons humming with barely contained energy. At their center stood Commander Vex Korath, tall even by Zephyrian standards, his scarred hide bearing the ritual markings of countless successful hunts. The service pods lay just ahead, small vessels designed for routine maintenance work but capable of limited interplanetary travel. Freedom seemed within reach. If they could just avoid detection for a few more minutes, that's when the scanner beam swept over their hiding place, and Commander Vex's head turned in their direction with predatory focus. The choice between worlds, the scanner beam lingered for what felt like an eternity before moving on, leaving Jackson and Kira pressed against the cold metal of the outer hull, barely breathing. Commander Vex's attention seemed to have been caught by something else, a false reading perhaps, or the lingering traces of Kira's original scent trail. "The service pod is just ahead," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible even to Jackson's enhanced hearing. "Once we're inside, We'll have perhaps 10 minutes before they notice it's missing. They moved with agonizing slowness across the exposed section of hull, every step calculated to minimize noise and vibration. The pod's airlock was already cycling open when the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor behind them. Warrior Kira, Commander Vex's voice carried clearly through the station's superstructure. I know you're here. You're sent. Trail ends at this section, but the readings are ... unusual. Kira froze, her hand on the pod's entry controls. In the reflection of the airlock window, Jackson could see her internal struggle playing out in the shifting patterns of her bioluminescent markings. Duty and survival instincts warred with something deeper, something the impossible bond had awakened in her. Report to me immediately, Vex continued, his tone carrying the weight of absolute command. We have detected human contamination in your biosignature. This requires immediate cleansing and debriefing. The word cleansing carried implications that made Jackson's newly enhanced senses recoil. Whatever process Vex had in mind, it would certainly mean death for him, and possibly something worse for Kira. I can surrender myself, Jackson whispered. Tell them I captured you, forced you to guide me through the station. Maybe they'll believe the contamination was involuntary. Kira's response was swift and decisive. No, the bio-readings will show the truth of our interaction. Vex is too experienced to be deceived by simple lies. She turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting depths of determination he'd never seen before. Besides, what has passed between us cannot be undone. The nest bond is real, regardless of how impossible it should be. The sound of multiple weapons being armed echoed through the corridor. Commander Vex was losing patience, and his hunter squad was preparing for potential resistance. There is another choice, Kira said suddenly, her fingers dancing over the pod's navigation controls. The coordinates for a neutral trading station 3 days from here. Humans and Zephyrians both use it for prisoner exchanges and information trading. You're talking about defection, Jackson realized. I'm talking about survival, she corrected. For both of us, and perhaps for something larger than either of our peoples currently understand. She activated the pod's systems, and Jackson felt the subtle vibration as the engines came online. But instead of launching immediately, she opened a communication channel to the hunter squad. Commander Vex, she said, her voice carrying formal military precision. Warrior Kira reporting. I have captured a human survivor, but the situation is ... complicated. Static crackled over the channel before Vex's voice responded, suspicious and sharp. Explain the nature of these complications, warrior? The human was discovered in a sacred nesting chamber, Kira continued, her words carefully chosen. Prolonged exposure to our ancestral crystals has created biological changes in both the prisoner and myself. I request permission to transport him to command for detailed analysis. The silence that followed stretched longer than Jackson's nerve could handle. He watched Kira's face, seeing the warrior's mask she'd worn during their first encounter reassert itself. But underneath, in the subtle patterns of her markings, he could read the truth of her emotions. Fear, determination, and something that might have been love. Denied, came Vex's eventual response. Turn immediately for contamination cleansing. The human will be eliminated on sight. Kira's finger hovered over the pod's launch controls. In the distance, Jackson could see the hunter squad approaching, their weapons trained on the service bay. Commander Vex stood at their center, his scarred features twisted with suspicion and growing anger. I'm sorry, Kira whispered, though whether to Jackson, to her commander, or to the ancestors whose sacred trust she was about to violate, couldn't tell. She slammed her palm down on the launch control, and the service pod shot away from the station with sudden, violent acceleration. Behind them, weapon fire lit up the void as the hunter squad attempted to disable their escape vehicle. But Kira's piloting skills and the pod's small size allowed them to evade the worst of the barrage. As the mining station fell away behind, them growing smaller against the starfield, Jackson felt the weight of everything they'd left behind. Two civilizations locked in a war neither seemed able to stop, both convinced of their own righteousness. Both blind to the possibility of understanding, but in the cramped confines of the service pod, as Kira plotted their course toward an uncertain future, something new was being born. It's not human, not Zephyrian, but a bridge between worlds that might eventually show both species a different path. The crystal formations had been left behind, but their songs seemed to follow them into the void, carrying the promise that some bonds transcend the boundaries their creators never meant to cross.